Welcome once again to the J Lowe Artist YouTube channel. Thanks for joining me on this artistic adventure. Today we'll be working with ink, pen and ink. So have your kneaded eraser, a number 2 or an HB pencil handy, and any type of ink that you would like to use. But make sure that it's archival, that it's permanent, that it's black, and a smooth ink. And let's start doing some ink drawing. First thing we have to do is when you're looking at the entire sheet of paper, you want to decide where you want to put this. You want to make it as big as possible. So what we do is we say, well, how big do I want it? I want it to almost touch the top of my page. So if you go up and you just make a little edge, and just say that's where the top of his head's going to go. And then his feet are going to go down somewhere towards the bottom. We don't want them right on the bottom, so you want to come up an inch or so. And you can make a little line there to say that's where his feet go. You've just established the size now. Then you say, okay, simple shapes. Let's start with his body. His tail almost touches the very end on the bottom on the right side. So you can make yourself a little mark there and say, okay, that's about where his tail goes. And his chest is going to come up in here. So all of a sudden, now you can see how big that body is going to be and just finish it out. There's his body. And it's just this kind of bean shape, and his head, you can come up here. And if that's where his chest is, his head is almost the same plane as his chest. If you go straight up, it's almost there, not quite. So I can just move that over, and you know where it's supposed to be. And it's about, what, that big? And it's attached with this kind of curve. It kind of comes down and then curves in. So there's his neck. The other side of his neck. Something like that. It's close. Doesn't have to be perfect. Right now, we're just establishing where things go. And then his beak, almost to the end, not quite. If you come in just a little bit, and just about half the width of his body above it, if you make a little mark there and say, that's where his beak's going to go, you can put in this kind of little edge, almost straight down to it. Almost. A little curve there. Now we've just established where everything goes. We can adjust it. Do we make it bigger, fatter, thinner, longer? Okay, just adjust it. You can even go in and say, well, his feet are kind of almost in the middle of that shape there. So if I kind of come down to the middle, just say there's a leg right there and there's a leg right there. And there's a shadow under there. I mean, if you wanted to, you could throw in that little shape for the shadow just to remind you that it's there. The other thing that is important to get where it's supposed to go is the eye. So if I go in and somewhere right just about straight up that beak right there, pretty close to where it kind of comes over, right up in there, somewhere is the eye. Now we've established pretty much where things are. I can now go through and just start doing a few more little areas, little details, little guides that kind of help me figure out where things go. There's his beak. Remember to draw things in first and then make corrections. You need that point of reference. And nothing here is going to be perfect. Don't get attached to your drawing because it gets erased. Everything we draw with our pencil gets erased. That's why we draw with the side of our pencil. We want it to be easily erasable. Or if you just have the hardest time drawing with the side of your pencil, you can draw with the tip, but draw lightly. Now, these are kind of just guidelines for me. I don't have to get in details, just enough to guide me along. The difference between the black and white wings, I'm just going to put in a little guide there just to help me to see where they go. I also want it to look kind of spontaneous, so I don't really want to take away that freshness that you get with direct drawing. So really, that's about the only guide I need. I don't need individual feathers. Nobody cares of those feathers if I don't get 15 feathers in there. You know, if I get 13 or 16, nobody cares. But if the eye is in the wrong spot, then people notice those things. So now I'm going to change over to my pen, and I'm pretty well done with this. I don't know if there's anything left that I can do with that. So I can discard that. What is the most important area? Yeah, the head. Okay, and some of this is really kind of important, but your eye kind of goes up here to the head. You kind of look at that eye, and you almost get kind of lost in that eye. It's so dark. So that's what we want to concentrate on. We spend a little extra time on the head. We know that everything else will fall into place. There is a tiny little spot of light in that eye. Do you see that little spot of light? Let's get into it a little bit deeper. Yeah. So I want to leave out that little spot of light. As I go through here, I'm going to just cross-hatch through that. But there's a lot of stuff that we leave out. One thing that if all you're drawing is black and white, why do you need the color? So sometimes you can go through and you can take out the color. And it'll make it a little easier to draw if you're drawing with just black and white. Okay, so just take out the color. And let's do the eye. So the first thing is that eye is not completely round. It's almost kind of teardrop shaped. So I'm just going to do a little edge. Sometimes you can do little dots and dashes. If you're not really sure about drawing this way, little dots and dashes are a good way to do that. Plus, if I need to change this, I can change it with dots and dashes. Just little dots and dashes. I'm going to leave out that little edge. That little edge is kind of right around the eye. And I want that little spot of light in the middle. So I'm going to just take out the little spot of light. I'm just going to do a little circle just to remind me that I don't get to put any light in there. Let me zoom into that even further. I don't want any darkness in there. And then I'm just going to hatch through it. And I'm drawing very, 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 very lightly. And that's really the eye. All around the eye is the eyelid, and it's just dots and dashes. So I'm just going to do little dots and dashes around the eye. There's the eyelid. And then this little area, there's a little darkness here. A couple little dots and dashes down there. Little over here. A little more darkness towards the nose or the beak. Little on top, and that's it. Little dots and dashes. Now, I'm going to do the outside of the head. So let's look at the head. Look at all this fun hair that's kind of sticking up there, but I don't want to draw every little hair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do this little edge using dots and dashes. You can draw it in first with your pencil. And then you can use the ink. So here goes. I'm just going to start out little dots and dashes. And I'm going to use a little feathered line. when you're doing a feathered line, the feathered line is you drop your pen in and then you give it a little flip. Flip, 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 flip. And you'll get this really thin, soft edge as it kind of comes away from the paper. And that looks very soft. That's called a feathered line. So I'm just going to come in. I'm going to do little feathered lines, just little tiny ones. And as I go along, there's the nose, the tip of the nose where it's kind of a little dark. And then just a couple little feathered lines as it goes around the head. Now the head is so light that I can leave a lot out. Okay, just go ahead and leave it out. And if you think, well, I'm not putting enough line in, that's okay. You don't have to. And every now and then, I'm going to just do a little longer feathered line, especially right up here at the top. Just a little bit. Kind of hanging out there. Just a couple little dots and dashes. And I don't even have to follow. If this is too small, I can come up and I can add a little bit more. That'll make the head look a little bit bigger. If I drew a line around it, I couldn't do that. That's probably too much line. If you didn't do as much line as I did, you probably did it better. Just a couple little dots and dashes, and that's it. Now what's important is where the beak goes, and then the shadow that comes in here. We can do that with some dots and dashes too. Let's do the rest of his head and his beak. So just over the eye, you see a couple little dots and dashes. I'm going to do these little feathered lines. Just a couple. About that much. That's it. We can always come back in and add more. Same thing over here. I might want to do a couple little dots and dashes. And again, that's about it. Once we get rid of the graphite, I'm going to get rid of the graphite in his head right there, just so you see how clean and soft and nice that is. If we had drawn a line around that, it wouldn't look so soft and natural. And again, with his beak, let's pick out only the darkest areas. It's right here under his eye. There's a little dark edge right there. And then a little one that goes up into there, and that's it. Your eye makes that connection. Those are connected. Then it kind of comes out and it turns and comes down. Put that couple little dots and dashes there. A little bit on the curved side over here. Some dots and dashes. Maybe a little bit as it comes into the neck. Right there. There are these little wrinkles that come around here, hardly noticeable. I don't want to draw a line there. It would look too dark. So if I had a little dot, just a couple little rows of dots, like that, that's all you need. Just a couple little rows of dots. And they kind of curve around that. There is a bunch of texture in there, but we don't need all that texture. Along his beak, the top of his beak, there is quite a pronounced line that comes down that way. The top of his beak is very light. So what would happen if we did just a little line up here and then break that, maybe have a little dot over here or a little line, and then just continue that all the way down to the little hook part of his beak. So I'm just going to come down and just a couple little dashes and dots. And where it comes to the end, I'm going to leave that little piece out, put in that little hook. And that's it. The top of the beak is done. No reason to do any more line there. Everybody understands that that's all connected. So then I'm going to come in here And this line is a little more pronounced. So I'm going to do a little bit more. Can I leave some out? Sure I can. I'm just going to do a little bit more than the top part. As it comes down, it becomes less and less linear. So I might just put in some little hatched lines like this. Hatch, hatch, hatch. This little edge that's up here is a shadow, and I'm going to just use hatched lines there. Instead of one full line, just little dots and dashes or little hatches. You can also use little dots as it gets closer together. Little dots. Also notice I'm barely touching my paper. Here's some more hatched lines down here. Maybe some more little lines. Just dots and dashes right where it gets kind of gray. Right there. Dots are awesome because they can put a lot of value, a lot of texture with just a tiny little dot or a little area. And again, I can come back in later and put more in if I need to. Little dots and dashes. Now this part of his beak is a little stronger. There's a shadow on it. We might be able to use a little more line there. But again, don't be afraid to break it. Dots and dashes. We can always come back into this later. Let me get rid of the graphite. And that's what we're left with. It's almost a ghost image. And I may decide later on, I need more. I need, more texture in there, more stuff in there. But right now, good enough. Down the neck, there's these feathers that kind of come in here, and I'm just going to use these little feathered lines just to come out away from it like this. Just little dots and dashes like feathered lines, and it's kind of following the direction that his feathers are going. Here's his neck, and as it comes around, I might add more dots and dashes. As you get away from the neck and the head, his body has, the feathers on his body are a little longer. So my line gets a little longer. So just little dots and dashes down the neck. Then right here, a little bit longer. A little more feathered line. You don't want to always go in the same direction too when you're doing these. Some lines will go left, some will go right. Some are a little longer, a little shorter. His back here is really super light. I'm just going to do a couple little dots and dashes. Pick it up over here and leave that entire area out. All that white area is right there. Just leave it out. When in doubt, leave it out. Now the fun part comes in, these dark black feathers. I'm going to do little hatched lines like this. Some of them are a little longer than others. And then I'm going to hatch through this entire dark area. And I can do it a variety of different ways, but I'm just going to hatch through it like this. Hatch, 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 hatch. And I can see my guide. I'm just going to hatch through that. I know it's dark. And I can see the feathers on the edges. So I'm just going to leave little ends kind of hanging out there. I know I got to go back into that and darken that up because those are really dark. He's also got these lovely little feathers. And so I'm going to just pick out little shapes of little triangular shapes in there. I'm going to kind of start with his wing over here. Just a couple little dots and dashes. And then when I get into the really dark spots, I'm going to use a little triangle. And just put in a couple little triangle spots there. And it's kind of spontaneous. I'm just kind of looking at it. Nobody cares if those are in exactly the right place. I'll pick out little triangles and then just darken them in. And as I get further out, the triangles become a little longer. I want to get rid of as much graphite as I possibly can. So I want to get to that point where I can get rid of all the graphite and not have to worry about whether it's part of my guideline or not. I'm just going to throw in some of this little dark area. Here's his tail. Not worried if it's in exactly the right place. And then, of course, his legs. And his legs have a little bit of texture to them, kind of a scaly kind of a texture. And so when we get back into his legs, we'll do that. But for right now, I'm just going to show where the legs start and stop. Dots and dashes, little scribbly marks. I can't hardly even see what's going on in those legs, but that's okay. Little dots and dashes, and I've got it. There they are. And I can't even see his little toes, but I can see some little shadows. So I'm going to do a little shadow over here. There's one toe. Another little toe right there. And a little shadow over here. A little shadow right there. Little shadow along here. Gotta be a little toe over there somewhere. Little shadow there. Little shadow along here. And these are just little scribbly, squiggly, dark edges. And there's his foot. I am going to put in this cast shadow that's down there with line that goes this way. Just like we did with our sphere. Voila! Now I can get rid of all my graphite. Now we can go back into this and really darken in some areas. So don't worry about the feet. I know those feet look terrible, but they will look better when we get done. but that's the least of our problems. Okay, we still want to get all the head and everything in there. The beak is darker than the rest of him. So how do you make that beak look darker? Couple of things you can do, and I'll just show you the fastest, and then I'll let you choose. You can do dots. Dots are going to take you much longer. What I'm going to do is just little hatched lines. I'm going to very, very, very lightly touch the paper with my pen. I don't want to press down on it. This is, again, like the feathered line. I'm just very lightly going to touch with my pen. I'm just doing little hatched lines. Very lightly touching. And you probably noticed that I went beyond some of those lines. It's okay. But look how that made that just slightly grayer. I'm going to do the same thing up in here and do a little bit more. I'm going to leave out some areas. Along this part of his beak that is a little darker, I'm going to go over some of the little lines that I've already put in there, and that'll darken them in. And then also, part of that beak on the top, where I've left that out, I'm just going to start my edge right there and then continue it on. So hopefully, it'll make that edge come through. And it might look like I drew a little line down that way, but I didn't. And you can say to yourself, well, I see other little darker spots in there. Maybe I want to go back in and darken in some of those areas with the same kind of thing, but in a slightly different direction. This is called cross-hatching. And you just keep doing that until it's as dark as you want it to go. I can do that anywhere throughout him or her, throughout the pelican. And these little lines are just thin. I'm kind of trying to follow the edge. So the edge of the shadow or the whatever, I'm kind of trying to follow that. And look how that little bit of line darkened in that, just enough. Down on his chest here, where his neck is, some long, thin feathers. So I'm just going to use some of that feathery line. And I'm barely touching the paper. And so it looks soft and light and thin. Now I can go over this whole thing as much as I want to with that feathery line. And again, try to make it so they're not all going the same direction. Sometimes I'll like S-curve it. I'll like flip it up this way and then I'll flip it around this way. It's a practice thing. I know I make it look easy, but I've been doing this 100 years, so. And once I go back over it, I'm going to go back over it again. And keep doing that until I'm happy with the look that I'm getting. Same thing over here. He's got some feathers that kind of come through. I might want to leave some of those little areas out. Now I'm just scribbling. Scribble, scribble, scribble. I can go back into it anywhere I want to and just light feathery lines until it is as light or dark as you want it. These little feathery lines, if you just do a couple little dots and dashes and just a few little feathery lines, don't do anything more than that. And if it gets a little darker, you can just do a couple little dashes in between and you got it. Try to be kind of spontaneous with your line. I don't know if you guys can hear this, but my pen isn't even pushing against the desk. I'm barely touching the paper with it. For this black stuff, I'm really just scribbling through it. And if you think, well, I can see some darker areas, just scribble a little heavier there. Last thing you want to do is his little feet. And there's a little texture to his feet. If you wanted to, let me zoom into you so you can see the texture. Okay, see that little texture that's in there? All you have to do is some little U shapes. So let me zoom into my feet and I'll show you what I mean. I'm just going to go in. I'm going to do some little U shapes like this. Just a few here and there. You guys see what I'm doing there? And that'll give you that texture. Some of it's a little darker, so you can do dots and dashes, or you can hatch through it like this to begin with. Just little dots and dashes, or little U's, and you got it. Does it bother you that those little toes aren't connected? Or do you look at that and you go, oh, I get it, that's the toe. Okay, if it bothers you a little bit, try a dot in between or something. But if it doesn't bother you, just leave it out. I mean, everybody understands that's the toe. One thing that might give you a little bit of trouble is this shadow that's cast down there. Just do some little dark areas like sand and then leave the rest out. A good place for his signature might be right over his back there, or right in front of his chest over here. Hopefully you had fun with it. Hopefully you learned something. And hopefully somewhere down the line it's made your life a little bit better. Because art makes life better. And I hope you all have a lovely day.